Hi, I'm Justin Lokitz, and this is the Design Shift Podcast, your weekly design guide packed with actionable insights, expert interviews, and bold ideas to help designers at every level lead with clarity, influence change, and shape what's next. In this episode, I sit down with Eric Fain, design leader, product strategist, and one of the rare operators who's spent decades moving between craft, systems, and business. Eric and I worked closely together at Autodesk, where he led design for major platform and collaboration products, helped shape the company's early generative AI strategy, and built alignment across teams operating at massive scale. Keep listening to hear how Eric thinks about design as a lever for judgment and decision-making in an AI-driven world, why designers have a unique edge when it comes to understanding systems and customer pain, and what it really takes to step out on your own, facing fear to building with confidence and clarity. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the show and the Design Shift newsletter for more conversations like this. Thanks for listening. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm super excited for everyone to be here today, and I'm generally pretty excited. Today, I'm extra excited because I've got my good friend and former colleague, a person my wife calls my partner, Eric Fain, on the podcast. And I think what's really interesting is, just like a lot of people, Eric works at the intersection of design, product strategies, and systems thinking. But also, he's my partner because we worked closely together at Autodesk for many years, where he led design on some of the company's most important platform and collaborative efforts. And really, he helped to shape its first generative AI strategy and built alignment across teams at massive scale in lots of different ways, too. And Eric's also had a long career, and really over that 20+ year career, he's consistently taken products from 0 to 1 while navigating the complexity of all these crazy enterprise environments. And that's also how Eric and I started, with a 0 product, took it to 1. And this conversation then is a little different because while Eric used to be in enterprise and had been running these big enterprise design efforts and teams, this conversation is what happens when you take that depth of experience and apply it on your own terms, and where design becomes less about artifacts and more about judgment, leverage, and the confidence to build, and even perhaps build something of your own, which is really what Eric's doing today. So first of all, welcome, Eric. Thanks for coming.
Happy to be
And
here.
and thanks for being my partner, as Laura says. So as we normally do, before I dive in, I'd just love to ground us all in what you do today, how you see your work today as a designer, product builder, or everything else.
Yeah, I think experiments is like the broad brush of
Mm.
how I think of it. Because what I'm really working towards is getting a portfolio of products and services into the market and just seeing how they work. Some of this comes from my personal experience as a cyclist. Some of it
Yeah.
comes from working with partners. And I'm exploring. I'm currently working on 3 projects right now. I don't want to be too tied to one. And I want to get as many out there as I can. Right now, I'm working on bike health, Sideline HQ, and one that I'm not quite ready to discuss.
All
And they're all in various states. Like bike health is ready to go. I'm changing some of the billing and a few things like that. But yeah, it's a few bits need to flip with the Apple App Store, and I'll be ready to go there.
That's awesome. I'm excited to talk about them in a little bit, but when you say you're building these things, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm never wrong, but correct me if I'm wrong and say you're building them. Like, you're not just designing something and going out there and, hey, here's my pretty design, and what do you think? You're building these things. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's soup to nuts. And I've heard you use the term solopreneur, which it comes into play here.
Hmm?
I think where we are right now with AI, it allows me to backfill all the roles that
Yeah.
need to be filled. And all of the product building stuff is natural to me from just years of working in product development. But
Yeah.
and then there are other places that are not as natural,
Yeah.
marketing, go to market. It's just not something I've done a lot of. I'm learning and experimenting there as well.
I love that. All right, we're gonna get deeper into that. Here, and I mentioned this in the intro too, you have designed products and systems and organizations and now your own solutions apps as part of a portfolio and maybe a portfolio career. Um, when someone asks you what kind of designer you are now, and I'm framing designer because I think that's what they would see in your LinkedIn, and perhaps that's how you talk about yourself, but maybe not. How do you answer that question? What kind of designer you are now?
When I think of design, I think of problem solving, problem
Yeah.
framing. I think that's the core thing. How do you take something and put some form and substance around it and then debate that with others? I'm not a designer with a capital D. I'm not going to give you a lot of off the cuff answers, but I do take pride in framing the problems well. I think most challenges are unique, or at least they are on the surface. And so I bring clarity to those problems. And
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter what the problem is. It could be org design, it could be a design vision problem, it could be anything else. Once that work is done in the beginning of a project, then a lot of it becomes wash, rinse, and repeat, and
Yeah.
do that on a smaller level. The thing that I've learned over the years is that I think it's interesting that looking at architectural design or product design or software design, they follow the same patterns. And I think it's really important to frame the problem well, or you can't really get started.
Yeah, totally get it. Totally get it. I remember you and I, and this is one of those 0 to 1s. This is where we met, right? At Autodesk, the 0 to 1, which was something called InfraWorks. And I remember at the time, one of the problems you were framing, and you definitely brought me along for the ride there, was we were trying to stick this totally new paradigm, this crazy 3D city modeling paradigm in this kind of older paradigm of what, was going on in AutoCAD, and these other sort of 2D things. And I remember you framing that problem as a design problem. Well, there was a problem here because I don't think this is how people use or will use 3D. I think there's a whole other paradigm in the interface and experience. And of course, that led us down the road of what was called the ribbon at the time, and none of that old school, old school like office product stuff to something wholly unique. So that really resonates with me when you talk about framing problems. And yeah, it feels like yeah, I know you for a long time. You've been doing that for just as long. What, and I just heard, I know about Sideline HQ and bike health. So those are just a couple examples, but what kinds of problems do you find yourself drawn to today that you maybe weren't earlier in your career, perhaps even working in enterprise software before?
I think I find myself, well, so I feel like everybody wants that used to be the yellow pages for something, and I'm not
Yeah.
going to date myself for that. And then it became the Google for something, and now it's probably the Claude or whatever, Chat GPT for something. But
Yeah.
what they mean is they want to solve these like giant world conquering problems,
Yeah.
or they want a corner market or something like that. I find myself gravitating more and more to this like non-sexy blue collar problems
Yeah.
where they're actually real. There's real meat, and there are a lot of users
Yeah.
and things like that. And we can still have a step change, but it's on a slightly smaller scale. And that's where Bike Health and Sideline HQ are.
I think that also resonates with me. And I think that also speaks to this solopreneur thing, which you mentioned, which I talk about a lot because I totally believe in, with especially with AI now, is as a solopreneur, can you build some world-changing chat GPT size thing? Maybe. But really, yeah, at the same time, there's so many cool problems to solve, problems that you could address that someone else is already addressing, but like, this could just be done better. And all of a sudden, to your point, like you can build this portfolio of cool things you're working on. And if you're excited about them and maybe they're blue collar or not, who cares? But you're
Yeah.
excited about them, you can get close to your customers in a new way and you don't have to feel like you've scaled something to some crazy $1 trillion number. It's like, no, I'm solving this problem. It's worth solving and people seem to like it. Yeah, great. Yeah, I love that. For reference, and there's a reference for anyone. Like there's a YouTube channel that I watch every once in a while called a Starter Story, and the guy he's pretty decent interviewer, certainly better than me, but yeah, most of the people he has on are that's exactly their sort of modus operandi. They go after, yeah, this thing already exists, but it's just they could be better. Why not just recreate a better version of it with new features, a better
That,
user interface?
that's largely the story behind Sideline HQ. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right. I've got some ideas for that too behind the scenes. So we could talk about the go-to-market for that when you're ready. So I'd like to keep sort of expanding on this a bit. Again, we know each other from these big complex organizations. And even before you and I were working together at Autodesk, we both came from equally complex, large organizations and startups and things like that. I think it's been certainly more than a year. What pushed you to step out and start building on your own versus like going back into another one of these big, crazy, complex organizations?
I think it's really been a few things. I think it started a while ago when I was working with a startup after Autodesk, after leaving
Yeah,
Autodesk.
yeah,
And we talked to you a couple of times, which was great. So I really started my career in the startup world.
yeah.
That's where I felt most comfortable. And even in Autodesk, I had I was there for 14 years, but I had probably 3 or 4 years on average on any given role, and each of
Mm,
them were just very different. A few of them were 0 to 1 products within this large corporation, and I just feel more comfortable there. I that's I like the new problems, looking at for a step change function and how people get their jobs done, things like that. And I'm just drawn to that more than anything else. And I don't miss the meetings and I don't miss all of
yeah,
the
yeah,
culture that,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that maybe that harkens to this new portfolio of things you have. It sounds like it's as much about not just solving these disparate problems in your own life, but learning about these and learning about these customer segments, which then enable you to keep learning in sort of a bunch of different parallel ways that you probably got from an Autodesk by jumping to new roles. Is that right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you left, Autodesk changed size, whatever happened, you left, and at some point you realize that you could do more, right? You can actually start to build things on your own. What did that feel like? What did you realize you could do faster or even better on your own?
So I think some of this started maybe last summer. I think
Mm.
it's how I would nail down was at Collective, the startup that I mentioned before. We were building out the product, and I remember very specifically listening to this podcast. It was a Lenny's podcast with
Oh,
Eric,
yeah.
who's he was the founder of the company that founded Bolt or whatever.
Right, right.
And he was just talking about the growth and all the crazy growth that they went from a couple of $1,000 to like 1 billion or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But the I think the thing that was the sirens call there that we heard, and I sent this podcast to my co-founder, and we were listening to it, and we were like, we need to experiment with this, and we need to test and just see what we can do. And we started off with some of the like more guided agents, if you will, like
Hmm.
and Bolt and things like that. But just started experimenting with the tools and seeing what we
Yeah.
could. And we built from there. I started doing, I would say, designery work. I built a UI framework and design system and things like that, while my partner was building out some of the core geometry things. And yeah, I think that was really was the start of it, where we were both like, yeah, we can do more with this.
Yeah. That's awesome. And when you say you can do more with it, what I'm hearing is, you didn't mention it specifically, but I think Bolt is that's similar to Level, right? It's vibe coding. And of course
Yeah.
you started there, but yeah, what you're saying is you were actually building something and actually
Oh,
building the solution. What were you started with? It sounds like did you start with Bolt? Is that right?
I tried Bolt and Lovable early days.
Hmm.
I pretty quickly switched over to Cursor and
Okay.
yeah, and then and went down that path. And yes, we our goal was to build product. It wasn't to experiment with the tools. We had to experiment to see
Yeah.
what can do what. And I think Replit and Bolt, they're great.
Yeah.
And Lovable, I think they're probably less geared towards building a serious professional tool.
Mhm.
Cursor or Gemini, just straight out of the box.
What? So you're coming from design. What does that look like as a solopreneur now? And you started with collective, so you were learning a lot along the way. And now I can see what you've done with Bike Health and Sideline HQ. As a solopreneur, like all of a sudden, all the jobs are yours now. We don't have a
Yeah.
team, like a scrum team or several scrum teams of designer, product manager, product owner, engineer, QA, QC, all those people. What does the workflow look like for Eric Fain, which now holds all the keys to the castle?
That's a good question. And I think of that as so I do think of these agents as partners.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
and so during product design, I will have I have a collection of agents that represents all kinds of these functions.
Hmm.
And I'll do I'll have agents for visual design, for
Yeah.
branding, for go-to-market, and all of the other things like software architect and
Yeah. Yeah.
designer. And the main agents will get stuck somewhere, or maybe I
Sure.
will have a question about direction. Uh,
Sure.
and at that point, I will just stop and say, okay, I want you to go to the orchestrator agent and ask these like four agents what to do. And
Yeah.
and it's really good about giving me an answer from each of those four and then summarizing it and things like that. And I'll get back a response. And I think about 70% of the time the response is this is good. I'll make a decision based off of that and move forward. And some of the time I won't do that at all. And and maybe I'll go back, or maybe I'll say no, that's not really the direction we're going, and just make a call that's outside of what the agent is recommending.
Yeah.
That's just sort of general product development.
Yeah. Yeah.
But all of the other roles that's actually where I ebb and flow with that. I have a lot of confidence around the building of the product. I have less confidence around all the periphery.
Ah.
And uh, I think what I've learned over time is that I can partner. I can partner with, I have a project set up in Claude that
Mhm.
has a ton of context for what I'm building, and I can go ask it questions, and it
Yeah.
knows. or I have a co-work. I have a co-work agent set up that has like a skill for accounting and startup
Yeah.
accounting and
Yeah.
Mercury and Zero, which is the tools that you use as a startup.
Yeah.
And so I can go ask that accounting questions. And I think by and large, that's really the challenge is knowing what questions to ask at what time, and then having the judgment to know where to carry forward your decision.
What you're describing there is a very typical intelligent, but also emotionally intelligent CEO, right?
Yeah.
That's what does a CEO do but make decisions and then rely on a team of people to then make other decisions or do the work and flag things when this requires something else or requires like a either a yes no question or a go this way or go this way. And it's super interesting to hear you talk about agents in that way and agents as now your teammates as a solopreneur and building all these cool things and learning these things. But it all and not just not but and it also has me thinking about you as a designer and you've got this background. You've been everywhere and you've done a lot. And it isn't like you said, it's not you don't think of yourself as a big D designer, a capital D designer, right? You're a designer of lots of different things and design process being namely one of them. What then does your design background give you now as a CEO of all these things? But what does your design background give you that most perhaps builders don't have right now that may not come from design?
I think the thing that my design background gives me is it's really understanding humans. Like,
Mm.
yeah, it's different than engineering and product. It's what are their motivations absent technology is
Yeah,
really how I look at it. And how can I imagine what it's like to be in their shoes? That I don't know that this is a tough question to answer because I am occupying all these different roles.
right.
And yeah, so I think it's that. I think it really is just I I want to be able to occupy a specific decision and understand how that ripples through a system and play that up and is to do that in my imagination as I'm
Yeah,
an agent.
yeah. What that's interesting because what you're saying is we talk about designers and empathy and that's what you're it sounds like what you're saying is that empathy is at the core, but it's not just empathy, it's like it's this ability to play that empathy out, not just in one decision right now. Oh yeah, the user customer says they want to do this thing. I hear them. Oh, I can feel that. I can see that. Great, I'll make the decision. But what you're saying is, I think, is really profound, by the way, is that it's playing out that decision via empathy through the whole thing. And it's not just an architectural decision from software point of view, but it's like, hey, let's step away from the UI, let's step away from technology. Who is this person and what are they trying to do in their lives? And how do I think through how we might help them do something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I fundamentally think of myself now as designing systems. And I think as a designer, I'm not really sure things have changed that much, but like the
Hmm.
palette of the tools has changed.
Yeah,
Uh, it's just different. You are representing all of those personas, and sometimes you do want to ask like a go-to-market agent early on
uh,
in the phase in the design phase, what is your perspective, just to get that.
right. What are so again, you've also mentioned that designers know how to ask questions. And again, like now you're talking about systems type or systematic type questions, what are the questions in your mind that unlock progress, that unlock the problems and so forth that you then grab onto and do something with?
That's, I don't know. I think this is this is often like bread and butter questions. You
Huh.
know, like who is this for? What is the outcome?
Yeah.
I've been fortunate enough to have really great product management engineering partners over the years, you being included, of course.
Thank you.
But I think it's like stepping back and looking at things from a different altitude, I think is important. You have to know where you're going from a vision standpoint you have to be grounded.
Yeah.
Uh, I had been doing in the corporate world this thing called value stream analysis, where you look
Mm.
at a workflow and you analyze the workflow and how the thing flows across from left to right,
Yeah.
and so what you're doing is finding places where value is blocked and where it pools. uh, and I feel like I'm doing a lot of that kind of work, but just on a smaller scale and
Mm.
often with agents. So trying to uncover what those gaps are in the product, in the market, to really understand, like, what to build out.
Got it. Yeah. And it also, and I mentioned this before with that InfraWorks products, it feels like this is something you've been doing for a long time, whether you recognize it or not, which is taking something that's deeply complex, and maybe it's something that already exists, right? It's your like this Sideline HQ that you're working on. I don't remember what the other apps are that are out there, but there are already solutions that do something similar, and you're trying to make it, I think, simplified in many respects. But how how do you do that, right? How do you take these deeply complex things like you did with InfraWorks, or maybe you're doing with Sideline HQ? It's deeply complex, and now you've simplified it without really dumbing it down just to its base functionality in some way. How do you do that, Eric, my
I
partner?
mean, you know, part of it is, I think iteration is maybe the answer, but
Yeah,
with bike health, I'll use that as an
good,
example.
cool.
I went through a bunch of trial and error, and I had one problem. And the problem was that the emotional attachment to the bike was missing. So what
Mm,
that meant was that you can't type in a Trek Madone. So you can use bike health and it works just fine without knowing what the brand and model is and all the
yeah.
parts that go on that brand and model. And so I had three different onboarding workflows,
Mm,
and there was one that was like a full setup, and one that was just get me started, and one that was you can add an AI invoice and it catalogs the parts and starts you that way. And so what I ended up doing is I ended up partnering with a third party organization, 99 Spokes, and it's a database of the specs and things that go along with the bike. And so that allowed me to bring all of those three workflows into one. So for onboarding, and like again, like it doesn't work any differently now, except you have the bike lookup in the front. And so you get that emotional connection, and it
right.
really does make the problem simpler. And so I would say, sometimes there's a technology solution, sometimes it's a design solution. But
Yeah.
in this case, I think the emotional connection is really like people have emotional connections to their bikes, and amplifying that and focusing on that is really important.
Yeah, that's great. And it goes back to that empathy piece, right? Which is you're not just trying to solve a technical problem. It's the entire thought process of the person and this emotional attachment to a bike. Which, by the way,
Yeah.
I totally feel having had a one of my favorite bikes stolen. I can
Oh
remember
no.
my yeah, and this was a long time ago, but I can remember my heart breaking in a way that it was like, God, this thing is so personal to me. And
Yeah,
I don't,
yeah.
and now you're saying it's, yeah, that there was something much deeper than if I had been sitting at a bar and I had my beer stolen or something like that. It's like, no, this is my bike. It's built for me. It's the seat's at the right height, and it's the right seat, and it's all this other stuff.
All that
Uh,
stuff.
all that stuff. So before we go on, actually, and I'm remiss for not having asked you this at the beginning, describe Bike Health and describe Sideline HQ. Describe these things that you're actually working on.
Yeah. So Bike Health is an app that it tracks your gear and your bike's maintenance. And so it
Mm,
depends on Strava. So if you don't have a Strava account,
yep.
not much use in it, at least for now. And so it tracks the mileage. You associate mileage with the bike, and then it tells you what your wear is over time. So it'll tell you like if you replace your chain now, it will cost you X amount of money, but if you don't do it, then it'll cost you X amount more, things
Mm,
like that. So that's fundamentally what it does. It has some AI components for you can type in, I replace my chain and it costs this much, and it'll fill all
right,
that stuff out for you. And
right.
I talked about the invoice thing. And then Sideline HQ is it's not quite as far along, but it's getting closer. But it is a like sports team management tool.
Mm,
Uh, if you have I'm a mountain bike coach, so if you have a mountain bike team, you can catalog all your rides in it or all of the
ah,
practice rides, but it allows for a lot of volunteer management and things like that. The the way mountain biking works, it takes a little army of people to actually put on a race at every level, at the organizational level, at the team
right.
level. And so it allows you to manage all of the volunteers for that,
Yeah,
manage your practices, and it integrates billing and things like that.
that's great. This also makes me think this is the difference for a builder, right? This builder like you and building a portfolio of really targeted experiences for people digitally in this case. This is the difference between you and what Salesforce or Autodesk would do with these things, which is you just mentioned bike like 5 times. One is a bike health app, and you also happen to be a mountain bike coach, and you're
Yeah.
building a team app. And what would a Salesforce or an Autodesk or an Adobe do? Oh, it would be this big suite and be bike health for each writer and then app team app, and it would be marketing and all this other bullshit. And what you're, it's not really bullshit, it's good stuff. But what you're talking about is no, actually, these are perhaps not only different people, they may even be the same person, but with different modes and different ways they interact in their lives. Like you, they might keep their bike up and might keep the health of their bike up to speed by understanding what goes into it, what they spend, and how often they ride. And they also might be a coach or a parent with a kid or kids on teams, and they might need to be a part of that too, but those aren't the same. There's overlap, but it doesn't mean they're the same thing, nor do they need a suite of products around them.
Absolutely not. I've built out Sideline to be for any sports, and it has like
Yeah,
a taxonomy in there. So if you're a soccer team, it gives you all the language for a soccer team. If you're a mountain bike team, it gives you all the
yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah, it's great. We've talked a lot about then building these things and how you've built and basically creating this team of agents and so forth to to move forward. Before I go on, this is more of a nitty gritty detail, right? When we first started working together, we were doing, I don't even remember. And I think we were talking recently. I don't remember what the app was. It was like one of the first web-based sketching apps. And it wasn't Sketch, but it was like to sketch out really simplified UIs. And of course,
I
now
think,
there's
I think it
what's it
was
called?
balsamic.
Balsamic. That's the one. Balsamic. Yeah, I'm so happy you remembered that. And it was balsamic with a Q at the end, right? So we were using balsamic, and I remember us going back and forth, and it was really so simple. And now, of course, we have these more robust ones. Figma I think, is really the one that most people use when they think about designing interfaces. How do you as a designer, and again, not this is not the big D designer, right? But you're mentioned designing design systems, the artifacts, things like that. If you were telling another designer what they would have to do or to get into this, and based on what you do as a designer and thinking in design, and not just the process of design, but actually like interfaces and experiences, how does that work for you then when you take your CEO hat off and you put your designer hat on and thinking about interfaces and agents and so forth? What does that look like for you? I'll stop there.
It's a pretty big question.
Yeah.
Um,
Or what tools do you use? Is there a process? Maybe that's a simpler version of that.
I I think I think in terms of a collection of jobs to be done,
Yeah.
and I think for each job to be done, you have a process for that. The way that I would go about building a system out is there's the whole technical stack. You're using React, Next.js,
Yeah.
uh, on Drizzle, just all down the line of the
Sure.
different things that you use. On the front end, there's Shad CN, there's Tailwind, stuff like that. I will go forth and I'll tend to start off with a rough design system, but then I start filling in the jobs to be done. And I think generally speaking, the jobs to be done would map to a wireframe workflow
Yeah.
implement.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but what I find is different is their workflow one, workflow two
Mhm.
that you would have in Figma is that I can from the start already imagine like how those workflows fit together and what
Yeah.
data feeds in and out between them. And
Okay.
so this is what I'm doing. I don't use Figma very much, and maybe some people would like for ideating and
Uh-huh.
I use it for like graphics production and things like that. But what I'm really doing is going through if I'm starting on a new job, say it's having your team get billed for or having you're getting billed for a team dinner. So you're
Hmm.
signing up for the team dinner, you automatically get an invoice or whatever.
Hmm.
I really set out, work with a few agents, come up with a spec, and then that becomes my plan of action.
I
So
see.
and then I'll work through that and then figure out where that fits into the calendar, where it fits into whatever else,
Yeah.
and you go from there.
Yeah. So it's really, it sounds like it's iterative and collaborative, just like a lot of the other things are with
Yeah.
agents. Yeah. Yeah. Makes total sense. Given that, and I teach a lot of designers, right? I teach them the business and the strategy side with the design MBA. Given that lots of designers may immediately think of their experience using Figma and building semi-static prototypes and things like that now, where do you think designers like that, or even design leaders, need to evolve to stay relevant as execution continues to get easier and easier? They're basically more widespread with these tools like Claude Code and Cursor and other things.
Yeah, I think this is all just roles collapsing, and
Yeah, sure.
you have various. Some in some cases you'll have engineers, and I taught Luma,
Uh-huh.
human-centered design at Autodesk, and like some of the best artists were engineers. They just were. Uh,
Yeah.
you never know
Mhm.
where that where that Venn diagram is going to overlap. But I do think that really is judgment and taste is
Ah,
the thing that matters the most. And I think that means that you really understand those decisions and how they're going to ripple through the system and know which one to follow. And that's not just product design, that's also marketing and
Yeah.
branding and all of the other things that go along with building out a product that you need to know. But I think it's really the judgment that matters the most. And I think that the designers have that as an inherent sense, thinking in terms of the entire experience and owning that experience. I think that's something that comes fairly natural, but I think just amplifying that and really doubling down on that is important.
Yeah. I, that doubling down, it feels like it's as much naming it, right, as a designer. I'm going to use my judgment and taste on this. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah. And not just assuming that it's just going to come, but it's, yeah, what you're telling me is this is what designers need to bring with them into this new world as all of, as you mentioned, these roles collapse into a digital curator role or whatever we call that thing, this
Yeah.
new role that you have taken on. I'm going to use my judgment and taste that comes from design, and this is unique to me and what I'm really good at, something like that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I want to bring us right back around to where we started with this, which is I've been writing a lot about, and I've had lots of people even drop off the newsletter because I think there are people who are scared of or maybe not super interested in the solopreneurship stuff, which is totally fine. I also didn't start Design Shift thinking about solopreneurship. I started with the idea that designers work in big companies and medium-sized companies and some small companies, but designers are collaborative and own their design workflows. And then as the world changed so rapidly, it turned into, oh, I think designers also need to know about how to do this stuff on their own, right? How to use their unique taste and ability to make decisions and judgment calls on their own. And at the same time, I get a lot of hesitation out there, certainly from, I get a lot from designers because of the way they've been working internally at maybe at big companies or what they're used to. What do you think what do you think people are afraid of, or maybe even designers are afraid of, if they when they consider going out on their own and doing what you're doing?
First, I think so. There was a Lenny's newsletter that went out recently that I think that it was basically the synopsis is that product management roles are going up, but
Yeah.
design
Yeah.
roles are flat, even in the Bay
Yep.
Area.
Yep.
And I think that's actually something to be cognizant of. And I think it's largely because a lot of the easier design problems, they're being done by agents now. Um, but I don't know. I don't know what people are afraid of. I imagine that they're afraid of like the money part of it is always going to
Sure.
be. So,
Sure.
there's you either you can afford it or you can't, but you have to have a plan. You have
Yeah.
to maybe you get on your partner's healthcare, like whatever it is, or just cut back on your expenses or something like that. But like that part's real. Like you have to take that seriously. Uh, you know, I think the other is that there's a concern that you just won't get traction. And this shows up as a lack of confidence, fear of the unknown. And I'm not going to make it out that like everybody is disposed to be a solopreneur or, but I think that you gotta just not be scared. It's, it really comes down to, I didn't think that I was going to be able to do this. I could build like a standalone thing. I could build a website with cursor, with whatever. And it wasn't until I really started saying, "Hey, I wonder if I can actually go do this."
Yeah.
I needed to connect to Strava, and I needed to use the Next.js auth package that's on GitHub, and I needed to use the Strava APIs, and I just I just went and tried it,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh my God, it didn't work at first. It
Yeah.
didn't work at first or second or third, but after I kept trying, it came around, and I was able to do this thing that I wasn't able to do before.
Yeah.
And then if you start playing that out, you can tackle many different problems just by stitching things together.
Yeah. What does that feel like? Yeah. What does that feel like to you now? Looking
uh,
back to where you started this whole thing. Yeah.
yeah, I think back to this. I think trying. I
Uh-huh.
remember he went from C plus to coding in C plus to JavaScript, and he was like,
Right.
"I feel like a god," uh,
Uh-huh.
and I feel like that. I just feel like there isn't anything that I can't do, and I don't mean to overstate that. I do. I sit down and I think through a plan. I work with the agents, and integrating with 99 spokes for bike health was super easy. Um, and it wasn't before. And part of that, the technology has evolved. Part of that is I just had the confidence to say, I'm going to go do this
Yeah.
and to plan it out and follow the steps.
I love it. Speaking of steps, we've got lots of designers and design leaders listening, and we're talking about designers across the entire spectrum, from early career to mid and design leaders and even senior design leaders. If they want to do what you do, what's the first move you think they should make, whether it's to become totally independent or take on fractional work or build this portfolio like you have?
Man, I think it's just to go and build something.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be confident that you can succeed and start where you know and then build out from there. If you're a visual designer, great. So start from that and build a design system and then build a periphery around that and start with a small idea and build that out. If you're really worried about the money side of it, then do it on nights and weekends, but just go build something. I think it's as simple as that. And it's not, that seems like advice, but it's really just like understanding the tool space
Yeah.
and understanding all the working parts. I think that's really the main thing, is just getting that experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And every designer I know at every level has a whole set of ideas, some of which are like things that they would love to put in their portfolio, which to your point might be just some visual mock-up of some app that would make their life better or
Yeah,
whatever. And it's, yeah, okay, great. Now you can make that real rather than the static Figma thing or Sketch or whatever, maybe even Balsamic, right?
yeah, yeah.
You can make that thing real today. It also has me think, again, it's funny because it all this stuff all just comes back around. It's the same thing that I heard 13 years ago. 13 years ago, I was in grad school, and there's a guy named Chris Waugh, and at the time he was a practice lead for health at IDEO. And he had before that he'd worked for Specialized Bikes. So here we are. It comes all the way back around. And at the time, I was sitting in a little auditorium thing, and he was doing a guest lecture, and he said exactly the same thing 16 or 13 years ago, which was everyone in this room should just go launch something, build something, and launch it on Kickstarter, just to see how the process works, just so that you can see that you could put something in your portfolio. You don't have to quit your job to go do that thing, right? You can do it on nights and weekends, but that structure will help you bring something to life, even if the Kickstarter doesn't work. You'll learn how to get all these components and pieces done, from marketing to building to the design to the business and all this stuff. And at the end of the day, no one's going to fault you for having tried to start a business. And that's
Yeah, and you
exactly what
learn
you're
from your
saying.
failures and build off of that. I mean, I've done a bunch of work with agents and go to market, and they always want to come up with a very robust, big
Yeah,
go to market plan. And I don't think that's exactly right for bike health. I need some videos to put out on Instagram
that's
and
great.
start
Yeah,
there. I'm doing that.
love
And
it. Yeah. All right. I've got just a couple questions to then, as a final reflection to wrap us up, because I've now had you for about an hour. What's something you believe now about yourself that you didn't believe a year ago?
oh, hold on. Okay. So something that I believe now, I think a year ago, I was still thinking of myself, maybe a little bit more than a year ago, but I was still thinking of myself primarily as leading design teams. And I think over the even the course of my career at Autodesk, I worked in so many different roles, and some of them were 0 to 1 startups. But what I really love is the building and the making something new. Now I have my hands in the code. It's just it's a lot different than it was back then. React, Shad, Tailwind, Zustin, all of those things. I feel like I really I'm what I really like is just building, and I want to get more things out there. So
Yeah,
that's where I am, and I it's worth it.
I love it. Okay. And I'm going to ask the other side of that question, the bookend to it, which is a year from now, or you could be a little more. If we, I think you and I were talking even a year and a half ago about some of this stuff, but a year or so from now, what does success look like for you? And what are you doing differently today to make that real?
I think success looks to me like just taking this portfolio of products and expanding on it and
Huh?
getting it out there so that it makes revenue is the main thing. I have a kid going to college and need to pay for that. And I think maybe having a fractional role as a design leader would be something I would be interested in.
Yeah.
I like working on these early stage meaty problems, and I think that's really what looks like. It's a portfolio that's out there, some hits, some misses,
Yeah.
and yeah, just moving forward that way.
Awesome. All right. I've got just two more questions. One more is you mentioned Lenny's podcast, Lenny's newsletter, which we both, I think you got me into that. And it was like, oh, yeah, this is awesome. What else? What else are you listening to or reading that, or otherwise that you would suggest any designer, someone like a designer that's ready to start thinking and learning about this world? What are some other podcasts, if it's not just Lenny's, that they should listen to, or books that they should read for that matter?
I listen to a few things or read a few things. And Andrew Carpathes,
Yeah.
I think he just started a podcast recently. There are, I don't know, maybe 8 or so in there. I do listen to him when I can, and more for I, like this world's crazy. What's on the horizon now is going to be like in the rearview mirror in 10 minutes.
Hmm.
Uh, I read like yeah on the design side. There's Rachel Kovitz,
Yeah.
you know, that I like how she frames some of the work, and Scott Belsky's newsletter I think is a little esoteric, but it's also very insightful.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right, Eric, finally, if you want people to reach you, which maybe you don't, but I'm going to say that you probably do. If people want to reach you, get a hold of you, see what you're up to, where do they go?
Yeah, there's always LinkedIn, Eric Fain on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
and maybe that's not the best place. You probably just email me, Eric at ericfain.com.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, Patna friend. I'm super excited to have you here. And when we were, I think we were hiking, whatever, a few weeks ago, I was like, you know what, actually, I don't know why I'm don't just have Eric on. He's doing all the stuff that I've been talking about. So thank you for being here. Thanks for being a good sport. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
It's been fun. I appreciate it.
Of course.
All right.
All right, man.
Thanks.
You got it.
Boop.
Thanks for listening to Design Shift. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a quick rating or review. It really helps more designers like you find the show, and it helps me make better shows. And if you're not already subscribed to our awesome newsletter, head over to designshift.me. See you next time.